Story 1. The camera in the welcome basket. I travel for work often enough that hotel rooms and rental houses have started to blur together in my head. Same digital locks. Same staged throw blankets. Same framed quote in cursive, telling you to laugh often, love much, and make memories. Most of the time, I barely even notice the places anymore. I arrive late, shower, answer a few emails, sleep, and leave before sunrise. That trip was different because it was supposed to be relaxing. My company had paid out a decent bonus, and instead of doing the smart thing and saving all of it, I decided to take a long weekend by myself in Vermont. It was October, right when every picture online makes New England look fake. The trees were bright orange and red, the roads looked painted, and every small town had one general store, one church, and one coffee shop, selling maple everything. I found the Airbnb maybe 3 weeks before the trip. It was a renovated guest cottage sitting behind a bigger farmhouse, but the host emphasized in the listing that it was fully private, with its own parking area, fenced yard, fire pit, and a carefully curated welcome experience. That phrase should have made me roll my eyes, but the place looked perfect. The interior was all warm wood, old books, antique lamps, and one huge window overlooking the woods. Exactly the kind of place people post online with captions about healing and resetting their nervous system. It had over 100 reviews, and basically all of them were glowing, clean, peaceful, cozy, thoughtful host. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. The host's name was Elaine. Her messages before check-in were extremely friendly, almost too friendly. She used a lot of exclamation points and called me dear more than once. She asked when I expected to arrive, whether I preferred red or white wine, and if I had any food allergies because she liked to leave a few homemade treats for guests. I remember thinking it was a nice touch. Looking back, it's strange how easily people can buy your trust by doing something that feels personal. I arrived a little after 6 in the evening. The sun had already dropped behind the tree line, and everything had that cold blue color right before dark. The main farmhouse sat farther back than I expected, half hidden by bare branches, and the guest cottage was off to the side near a gravel path. The place looked exactly like the pictures, which was reassuring. Cute, warm, expensive looking. The porch light was on, and next to the door, there was a little chalkboard sign that said, "Welcome, Nathan," even though my name isn't common enough that people usually get it right on the first try. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and cedar. There was soft jazz playing from a speaker somewhere in the kitchen. On the counter sat a bottle of wine, a paper bag tied with twine, and a woven basket filled with little things: local chocolates, tiny jars of jam, a packet of cider mix, travel tissues, 2 instant hand warmers, and one of those mini Polaroid-style cameras. At first I thought it was decorative. The camera was small, white, and sitting at an angle on top of a folded handwritten note. The note said, "For memories. Guests love using this around the property. Feel free to leave the film in the basket when you go, and I'll add the best shots to the cottage scrapbook if you'd like." That struck me as slightly odd, but still in a quirky bed and breakfast kind of way. Plenty of places have guest books, disposable cameras, postcard walls, things like that. I set my bag down, looked around, took a few pictures of the living room just because it seemed funny, and went out to town for dinner. Nothing felt wrong the first night. I had a burger at a nearby tavern, came back around 9, lit the gas fireplace, watched half a horror movie with the volume low, and fell asleep on the couch before moving to the bedroom. I only noticed the first weird thing the next morning. I woke up early from the sound of gravel crunching outside. Not a car exactly, more like careful footsteps. I stayed in bed for a second, listening, then got up and moved the bedroom curtain aside maybe an inch. There was a woman standing near my car, older, tall, wearing a quilted coat and holding a mug with steam rising from it. She wasn't doing anything dramatic. She was just standing there, looking at my windshield. When she turned slightly, I realized it had to be Elaine. She had silver hair pinned back, And even from the window, I could tell she had that cheerful kind of posture some people get from working in hospitality. I was about to wave when she slowly raised her free hand and touched the hood of my car with her fingers. Just for a second. Then she took a sip from the mug, turned, and walked toward the farmhouse. That bothered me. Not because it was overtly threatening, but because it felt invasive in a way I couldn't really justify. Maybe she'd just been checking if I'd arrived safely. Maybe she liked the car. Maybe she was just weird. I told myself all of that while brushing my teeth. Still, I locked the cottage door again afterward without really thinking about it. I spent most of that day driving around and hiking. When I got back in the late afternoon, my bed was made tighter than I'd left it. The used coffee pod I'd forgotten by the sink was gone, and the little basket on the counter had been rearranged. I know that sounds minor, but I hadn't requested cleaning, and Elaine had never mentioned entering during a stay. I checked the listing to see if I'd missed some note about daily housekeeping. Nothing. Just private guest cottage. I messaged her through the app, keeping it casual. Hey, just checking. Did someone stop by the cottage today? She answered almost immediately. Only to leave fresh towels, dear. Hope that was okay. Didn't want to disturb you. That should have ended it, but it didn't. Because there were no fresh towels. The same 2 towels I'd used were still hanging in the bathroom. So either she'd entered for another reason and lied, or someone else had. I started doing that thing people do when they're alone somewhere unfamiliar, where every tiny inconsistency suddenly becomes proof of danger. I checked the windows, checked the back door, checked under the bed, like I was 10 years old again. Everything looked fine. No missing items. No sign anyone was hiding anywhere. So I tried to let it go. That night, I opened the little camera again because I realized it still had a few exposures left. I took one photo of the fire pit outside, one of my half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, and one goofy selfie because I planned to leave the camera in the basket when I checked out. The camera made that tiny mechanical whirring sound each time it printed. I left the pictures on the kitchen counter to develop while I showered. When I came back out, there were 4 photos instead of 3. At first, I thought maybe one had gotten stuck and printed late. But when I picked them up, I realized the extra photo was older. It was already fully developed, while the others were still gray and washed out. It showed the cottage living room from a high angle near the kitchen. In the photo, I was asleep on the couch from the night before, one arm over my face, the TV still on. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 seconds, trying to force some explanation into place. Maybe the camera had old film in it. Maybe previous guest. Maybe some weird promotional thing. But the throw blanket in the picture was the one I'd used. My overnight bag was on the chair. My shoes were by the door exactly where I'd left them. Someone had taken that picture while I was asleep. I checked every corner of the cottage for cameras after that. Lamps, smoke detector, bookshelf, TV stand, vent covers. I even unscrewed the decorative vent in the bathroom because I'd heard enough stories online to know where people hide them. I found nothing. Then I looked around the room trying to figure out from where that photo could have been taken, and that's when I noticed the loft shelf above the kitchen cabinets. It was mostly decorative. Old trunks, fake plants, some stacked quilts. But there was just enough space above the cabinets for a person to lie flat. I dragged a dining chair over, climbed up carefully, and looked. There was dust, a rolled blanket, and a small square indentation in the dust where something had been set down recently. Right next to it was one dark gray wool sock. Not mine. I didn't call the police right away, and I know that sounds stupid. The problem was, I didn't know what I could say. Hi, I found a photo of myself sleeping and a random sock in a loft space. It sounded insane, even to me. So instead, I took pictures of everything with my phone, grabbed my bag, and drove to the center of town where there were people around. I booked a motel for the night and called Airbnb support from the parking lot. The first person I got sounded half asleep and kept putting me on hold. Eventually, After I insisted that someone may have entered the property while I was sleeping, they escalated it and said they'd contact the host. That made me panic more, because the last thing I wanted was for Elaine to know I'd left because I thought she, or someone near her house, had been inside while I slept. Less than 15 minutes later, she messaged me. "Nathan, I'm so sorry if the old scrapbook camera startled you. Sometimes it prints previous exposures strangely. Hope you're enjoying town." That message chilled me in a way I still can't explain. Not because it admitted anything, but because I had never told her about the photo. Not in the app, not on the phone, nowhere. The support agent only knew I suspected someone had entered the cottage. So how did Elaine know the issue involved the camera? I drove back once the sun was still up, but only because I wanted my charger and laptop stand, which I'd left on the kitchen table in my rush. I didn't plan on going inside if anything felt off. When I pulled into the gravel spot, Elaine was already there, waiting beside the porch. Smiling, holding that same mug. She apologized before I even got out of the car. Said she could tell I was a private person, and that she had probably overhosted. She kept talking in that soft, overfamiliar tone while I stood there holding my keys like a weapon. Then she said something that locked every muscle in my body. She said, "I only go in when guests are asleep, if I'm sure they won't be uncomfortable." I remember actually thinking I must have misheard her. There was no way a person could say something that insane, that casually. But she smiled again and added, "Some people love the little memory surprises. It makes the stay feel special." I asked her what she meant, and her expression changed just slightly, like she realized she had skipped a step in the conversation. She said she liked to preserve moments for the scrapbook. That candid shots made people seem more real. That posed photos never captured the atmosphere of a stay. She said all this as if she were discussing flower arrangements. I told her I wanted my things, and I was leaving. She nodded, stepped aside, and said, "Of course, dear, though I think it's sad to leave before the best part." I didn't ask what the best part was. I went in, grabbed my stuff in under 30 seconds, and on my way out I noticed something hanging on the wall by the bedroom that I'd somehow ignored before. It was a framed collage of tiny Polaroids. Guests at the fire pit, guests on the porch swing, guests reading in bed, guests asleep on the couch. Dozens of them. Maybe more. A whole wall of people who clearly had no idea they'd been photographed in private. I left so fast I nearly tore the screen door off its hinge. This time I did call the police. I drove to the station in town and explained everything in the least insane way I could. To their credit, the officer didn't brush me off. He asked to see the photo, my messages, and the pictures I'd taken of the loft shelf. They sent someone out to the property that evening. I never heard every detail of what they found, but I did get a follow-up call the next day. The officer told me the host denied entering the cottage while guests slept and said all photographs were taken with permission. However, the officers also found a narrow access hatch at the rear of the kitchen cabinets leading into the storage void above them. It had a pillow, a flashlight, and several instant cameras stored there. The listing disappeared within 48 hours. Airbnb refunded me immediately and asked if I needed help finding alternate accommodations, which felt a little late by then. For a while, I kept checking local news expecting to see some huge story about the Airbnb camera woman or something equally surreal. Nothing ever really surfaced beyond a brief mention of an investigation into unlawful surveillance. What still bothers me isn't just that she was taking pictures. It's how normal she thought it was. She had built an entire little hospitality ritual around violating people in the gentlest possible way. Fresh jam, cozy blankets, a handwritten note. Then, a person crouched above your kitchen while you slept, waiting for the exact moment your body looked peaceful enough to preserve. I never stay in detached rentals anymore. Hotels only, upper floors if possible. And anytime I see those charming host messages about personalized experiences or memory books, I get this cold feeling in my stomach. Because somewhere in Vermont, maybe in a storage box or maybe in a police evidence bag, there's a little square photo of me asleep on a couch in a place I paid to believe was private. And the part I hate most is this. If that extra photo hadn't slid out of the camera when it did, I would have checked out smiling, left her a 5-star review, and thanked her for the thoughtful welcome basket. Story 2. We booked a lake house that wasn't empty. My friends and I did the Airbnb trip because we were at that age where everyone keeps saying you should make the effort before life gets too busy. We were all in our late 20s, scattered across different states, and hadn't had a proper weekend together in maybe 2 years. So Connor found a lake house in upstate New York, sent the link to the group chat, and within 10 minutes, we had booked it for Friday through Monday. There were 4 of us going. Me, Connor, Elise, and Martin. The place looked ideal for a lazy fall weekend. Big dock, kayaks, fire pit, decent Wi-Fi, hot tub. Most importantly, it seemed isolated enough that we could be loud without bothering anyone. The host called it a private retreat tucked away from the world. We should have paid more attention to that wording, because tucked away from the world also means tucked away from help. We drove separately and arrived close to sunset. The house sat at the end of a long dirt road lined with pine trees. There were no neighboring houses in sight, just water, woods, and one weathered 2-story home with dark green shutters and a wraparound deck. It looked great in person, maybe even better than the pictures, though the first thing Connor said when he got out of his truck was that it smelled like a fireplace had been burning recently. The rest of us noticed it too when we stepped inside. A strong wood smoke smell, fresh enough that it felt like someone had been there that day. The host's check-in message said the house had been cleaned and aired out that morning. We joked that maybe the cleaning crew had gotten cozy. Then we saw the kitchen. There were 4 mugs drying on the rack. One still had a tea bag string hanging from it. In the sink sat a spoon and a cereal bowl with cloudy water pooled in the bottom. The dishwasher was cracked open, and inside were plates and pans, half washed. That's the moment the vibe changed. Not into immediate panic exactly, just that collective unease when everyone silently realizes the same thing at once. This didn't look like a recently cleaned rental. It looked like someone had paused real life and stepped out for an hour. Connor messaged the host right away. No answer. We called. Straight to voicemail. While we waited, Martin started doing a walkthrough on the first floor, mostly joking around like he was some kind of cop clearing a building. Then he went quiet and called down from upstairs. Guys? We went up to the second floor and found him standing in the doorway of the larger bedroom. The bed was unmade, like someone had slept in it hard. One pillow on the floor. Indentations still visible in the mattress topper. On the dresser sat an open paperback novel face down, like the reader planned to come back after dinner. There was also a glass of water on the nightstand with dust floating in it. At that point, Elise wanted to leave immediately. Connor wanted to wait because we'd driven 4 hours and maybe there was some stupid, harmless explanation. Double booking, lazy cleaners, owner stopped by, whatever. I was somewhere in the middle. It all felt wrong, but not wrong enough yet to justify throwing away the weekend. Then Martin opened the closet. There were men's clothes hanging inside. Not staging clothes. Real clothes. Flannel shirts, jeans, a winter coat, a pair of boots on the floor, and one duffel bag shoved to the back. We left the room after that and checked the other spaces fast. The smaller upstairs bedroom looked mostly unused except for a single phone charger plugged into the wall. Downstairs, in the mudroom by the side entrance, there was a set of keys hanging from a hook and a half-empty bag of dog food under the bench. The listing had specifically said no pets. We finally got a response from the host. Not a call, just a message that said, "House should be ready. If anything seems off, property manager may still be finishing up." That was it. No apology. No clarification about why there appeared to be a human being actively living in the master bedroom. Connor called him again and again. No answer. By then it was getting dark, and none of us wanted to start a whole new search for somewhere else to stay in a rural area on a Friday night. So we made an incredibly dumb compromise. We'd stay one night, keep our doors locked, and leave in the morning if the host hadn't explained everything. The rest of the evening was weird, but manageable. We avoided the master bedroom entirely and split up the other sleeping arrangements. Connor took the couch downstairs, I took the smaller upstairs room, and Elise and Martin each claimed one of the twin beds in the loft. We drank a little, played cards, and kept trying to force the mood back to normal. It almost worked. Almost. Around 11, while we were in the kitchen, we heard a sound from outside near the deck. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door. On the glass sliding door facing the lake. Everyone froze. The outside beyond the glass was black, except for the reflection of our own room. Connor moved first and turned off the kitchen light so we could see out better. For a second, nothing. Then a shape moved past the deck railing. Human height. Slow. Elise said, "Nope," grabbed her bag, and went straight toward the front hall. Connor stopped her because, if someone was really outside, none of us wanted to open the door blindly. We stood there in total silence until Martin whispered, "Maybe it's the property manager." Right on cue, there came another 3 knocks on the glass. Connor shouted through the door, asking who was there. No answer. Then we heard footsteps crossing the deck boards to the side of the house. Just walking, unhurried, like whoever it was knew exactly where everything was. We locked every door, checked every first-floor window, and called the host again. This time he answered. Connor put him on speaker and immediately asked if someone else was supposed to be at the property. There was this pause. Then the host said, "No one should be bothering you." Not "no one is there," not "I'll call the police." Just "no one should be bothering you." Connor told him someone had knocked on the lake-facing door and walked around the house. The host asked if we had used the outside lights. Connor said yes. Then the host said something that made Elise start crying quietly right there in the kitchen. He said, "If the lights are on, he usually doesn't come up to the house." Connor asked who "he" was, and the host backtracked instantly. Said there was a local fisherman who sometimes crossed near the shore and liked to mess with renters. His tone was way too rehearsed, like he'd told himself that version before. Connor said we were leaving and wanted a full refund. The host argued that it was late, roads were dark, and we should just stay inside until morning. That was enough for us. We started grabbing our things, moving fast, trying not to sound panicked even though the entire house suddenly felt occupied by something invisible. I went upstairs for my bag, and as soon as I reached the second-floor landing, I heard a floorboard creak in the master bedroom. Not outside. Inside. The door to that bedroom, which we had left half closed, was now open wider. I stood there for maybe 1 second, every nerve in my body firing at once. Then I backed away and hissed for Connor. He came up with Martin behind him, and before either of them could say anything, we all heard another creak from inside the room. Connor shoved the door open fully. The room looked empty. Bed still messy, closet shut, bathroom dark. But the window over the lake was open maybe 4 inches, and cold air was pushing the curtain inward. It had definitely been closed earlier. Then Martin pointed at the closet floor. The boots we'd seen before were gone. We didn't clear the room. We didn't act brave. We ran. All 4 of us out the front door, bags half zipped, leaving food, chargers, and one of Connor's speakers behind. We got into our cars and started them almost at the same time. My hands were shaking so badly I stalled once backing out. As my headlights swept across the side of the house, I saw someone standing in the trees near the edge of the yard. A man. Tall, heavy jacket. One hand up shielding his face from the lights. He wasn't rushing us. He was just watching. We drove 10 minutes to the nearest gas station and called the police. They took it seriously enough to send a unit, mostly because we said we believed someone had been inside the house. We waited there for almost an hour, drinking stale coffee and replaying every moment. Connor kept insisting the host knew exactly who that man was. Elise said maybe the man actually lived there, and the host was renting his house without permission. Martin said the whole thing felt like we'd interrupted an arrangement. The officer eventually called Connor back. He said they found a man at the property, but he wasn't breaking in. He had keys. According to the man, the house belonged to his late brother, and he had been staying there on and off while it was tied up in some family dispute. He claimed he had no idea it was being rented out on weekends. The host, it turned out, was the brother's son. He had listed the house anyway, and simply instructed cleaners to work around the uncle's occasional presence. The police couldn't fully verify every family detail right away, but they did confirm the man had a legal connection to the property and wasn't some random trespasser. He had apparently been sleeping in the master bedroom when the cleaners came, leaving during check-ins, then returning late at night because he believed he still had the right to be there. Which means while we were downstairs playing cards and trying to laugh off the bad feeling, there was a stranger either hiding somewhere on that property or waiting for us to settle in so he could move around inside a house we thought we had rented privately. Airbnb refunded the trip after a lot of calls and documentation. The listing vanished soon after. We still bring it up sometimes, usually after a few drinks, and someone always says the same thing. At least we left when we did. Because the truth is, the scariest part wasn't the knocks on the glass or the figure in the trees. It was that normal little compromises kept getting us closer to staying the whole weekend in a house that was never actually empty. And the one detail that keeps me up is the open window upstairs. Because no matter which version of the story is true, someone opened it while we were all downstairs. Quietly, deliberately, while deciding whether or not to let us know we weren't alone. Story 3. The Basement Rule. 2 summers ago, my girlfriend Sarah and I rented an Airbnb outside Asheville for a 5-day trip. We wanted something wooded and quiet without being fully off-grid, and the place we found seemed perfect. It was listed as a converted artist's home in the mountains, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a record player, handmade furniture, and what the host described as old house quirks that add to the charm. I know now that any sentence containing the word quirks should be treated like a legal warning. The host sent a long message the day before check-in. Most of it was normal: parking instructions, Wi-Fi code, bear safety, local coffee recommendations. But one part was oddly specific. In all caps, by itself on a separate line, it said, "Please do not open the basement door." Under that, the host explained that the basement was unfinished, unstable in places, and contained supplies belonging to the owner. "No need to access it," she wrote. "It remains locked at all times." Sarah laughed when she read it and said it sounded like the start of a horror movie. I agreed, but only in the way you agree with a joke, because you think you're safely outside of it. We got there in the afternoon during a thunderstorm. The driveway was steep and half gravel, half mud, and the house was tucked into the side of a hill under huge trees that made it feel darker than it should have been. It was beautiful, honestly. Maybe one of the nicest rentals I've ever seen. The front room had high ceilings with exposed beams, shelves full of records, and one wall painted a deep matte green. The air smelled like old wood and rain. The basement door was exactly where you'd expect it to be least comforting, at the end of a short hallway near the kitchen, painted the same color as the walls, except for the black iron latch and separate deadbolt. It looked older than everything else in the house, thicker somehow. The kind of door that seems heavy even before you touch it. The first evening was fine. We unpacked, ordered takeout, listened to records, and watched the storm roll past the windows. Around 10, when we were getting ready for bed, I thought I heard a low thump from somewhere under the floor. Just one. I asked Sarah if she heard it, and she said no. I assumed it was the house settling. Then it happened again, maybe 20 minutes later. One heavy sound. Not a pipe. Not the random click of old wood expanding. More like something bumping against a wall in a distant room. Sarah heard that one. We both looked toward the hallway automatically. The basement door was out of sight from the bedroom, but I remember the exact feeling of lying there in the dark and becoming aware of the house vertically, like there was a whole other level existing beneath us that we weren't supposed to think about. Nothing else happened, so eventually we slept. The next morning we went hiking and were out most of the day. By the time we got back, the weirdness of the noises had already started to fade in my mind. That changed the second we walked into the kitchen and saw that the basement door was standing open an inch. I know with absolute certainty it had been closed the whole previous day. I even remembered glancing at the deadbolt before bed, because the whole "don't open this door" thing had gotten under my skin. But now it was open just enough to show a seam of darkness. Sarah immediately said maybe the host or a maintenance person had come by. I checked the app. No message. No missed calls. I pushed the door shut and turned the deadbolt. The metal clicked, but not cleanly. It felt loose, like the frame wasn't aligned right. That night we heard the sounds again, except this time there were 3 of them. Thump. Pause. Thump. Then a dragging scrape. Sarah sat up in bed and said, "That is not the house settling." I got my phone flashlight and went into the hallway, even though every instinct told me not to. The basement door was closed. Deadbolt turned. But when I stood close, I could hear something on the other side. Faint. A kind of soft shifting sound, followed by what I thought was breathing until it stopped the moment I leaned in. I backed away so fast I nearly hit the wall. Sarah asked what I heard and I lied. I said probably pipes. She knew I was lying, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say out loud that it sounded like there was a person in the basement. We messaged the host. No response that night. Around midnight, just as we had finally convinced ourselves to stay in bed and wait until morning, we heard the deadbolt downstairs rattle. Not violently, just a careful metal turning and releasing. Then the door opened. I know this because we heard the slow creak of hinges, then the distinct stop of wood against the hallway wall. Sarah grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. Neither of us moved. We listened as the house went completely silent afterward, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but occupied. No footsteps. No voice. Just the knowledge that something had changed below us. We stayed locked in the bedroom until daylight. I wish I could make that sound braver than it was, but we were terrified. Every few minutes I expected footsteps on the stairs, or a knock on the door, is less than #0. 5# is greater than nothing came. Dawn finally bled through the curtains, and the first thing I did was call the host instead of message her. She answered sounding annoyed, like we had interrupted her Saturday morning. I told her the basement door had opened during the night, and we'd heard noises from downstairs for 2 nights in a row. There was a long pause. Then she asked one very specific question. "Did you leave any food out?" I said no, and asked what that had to do with anything. She sighed and said sometimes a raccoon got into the lower crawl access from outside. I asked if that meant the basement connected to the outside. Another pause. Then she said she'd send someone later. That answer made no sense. If it was just an animal, why had she told us never to open the basement at all? Why the deadbolt? Why not just say there was occasional wildlife access? Instead, she had made the basement feel forbidden. We started packing to leave early. While Sarah loaded the car, I made the decision that I still regret and also can't imagine not making. I went to the hallway, unlocked the basement deadbolt, and opened the door. The stairs went down sharply, into a stone-walled space, with a single bare bulb on a pull chain. The smell hit first. Damp earth, mildew, and something animal. Not decomposing exactly, just musky and stale. I switched on the light. The basement was half finished, like she said, but only the front half. Shelves, paint cans, old furniture. The back half disappeared behind a hanging plastic sheet. On the concrete floor near the foot of the stairs sat a folding chair, a thermos, and an empty food wrapper. Not old, recent. I didn't go past the plastic sheet. I just stood there understanding, all at once, that whatever explanation the host had offered, someone had definitely been spending time down there. Maybe sleeping there. Maybe watching the stairs. Then I noticed another thing. Along the stone wall beside the staircase, about eye level if you were seated in the folding chair, there was a narrow rectangular gap cut into the insulation board. It looked intentional. Behind it was darkness, but if you leaned the right way, the slit lined up with the hallway outside the basement door. Someone down there could watch the house without being seen. I slammed the door, locked it again out of pure instinct, and got in the car. We drove straight to town and called Airbnb support. While we were on hold, the host finally messaged back asking whether everything had settled down. That wording made my skin crawl. Not is everything okay. Not did maintenance fix it. Everything had settled down. We filed a report with the county sheriff because by then we believed someone had been accessing or occupying the basement during guest stays. Later that afternoon, an officer called and said they'd visited the property with the host present. According to her, the basement had once been used by her adult son when he needed space, but he no longer stayed there. She insisted the chair and thermos were old, and the sounds were probably animals under the house. The officer couldn't prove otherwise right then, but he did tell us one detail that confirmed we hadn't imagined the worst part. There was an exterior access panel at the rear foundation, partially concealed by brush, and it led into the same lower space behind the plastic sheet. Meaning someone could enter from outside, move through the back of the basement, and come up to that locked door whenever they wanted. The listing disappeared a week later. No explanation, just gone. We got a refund and a generic safety apology email. For months after, Sarah refused to stay anywhere that wasn't a hotel. I didn't blame her. People always ask why I opened the basement if the host explicitly told us not to. The honest answer is that by morning, not knowing had become worse than knowing. But I still think about what would have happened if we'd stayed all 5 nights. If we'd laughed off the noises, followed the rule, and gone on believing the door was locked for our protection. Because I don't think the rule was meant to keep us out of the basement. I think it was meant to keep us from realizing the basement could come out. Story 4. The host kept asking if we were sleeping yet. This happened to my sister, Lena, and me last winter, and it's the reason I turned off Instant Book on my own rental account afterward. Not because I host, but because I no longer like the idea of strangers being able to learn exactly where I am, when I arrive, and how isolated I'll be with almost no conversation beforehand. Lena and I had booked a 2-night stay in a small desert town in New Mexico. We were driving through several states to visit family for Christmas, and we wanted one stop that felt interesting instead of just another roadside hotel. The Airbnb we picked was advertised as a restored adobe casita just outside town, with amazing stars, handmade pottery, and true silence after dark. That last phrase sounded poetic online. It sounded different in person. The casita sat by itself on a flat stretch of land, maybe 15 minutes from the nearest gas station. There were other houses in the distance, but not close enough to help. The host didn't live on site. He told us that proudly in the listing, saying guests loved the privacy. He also sent a lot of messages once we booked. More than any host I'd ever had. At first it seemed like overeager hospitality. He asked what time we'd be arriving, what car we were driving, whether either of us was a light sleeper, whether we planned to use the outdoor fire bowl, whether we would want extra blankets, whether we preferred the bedroom warmer or colder at night. It was too much, but none of the questions alone were creepy enough to cancel over. We got there around 5. The place looked exactly like the photos. Low adobe walls, string lights over a small patio, sparse stylish interior, and a perfect view of open desert through the back windows. It really was beautiful. The host had left a note on the table with his number, and the sentence, "Text me anytime, day or night, if you need anything at all." He texted before we even finished unloading. "Glad you made it. Comfortable so far? Then 20 minutes later. Did the heater kick on okay? Then after sunset. Stars are especially good tonight. Try the patio around 10. Lena thought he was annoying but harmless. I agreed until the messages changed tone. At 9:14 p.m., he texted, "Are you two still awake?" No context. No follow-up. Lena laughed and said maybe he had forgotten to mention something important. I didn't reply. A minute later, another text. Just asking because the wind can be loud out there. That explanation felt weirdly stitched on. Like he had sent the first message, realized how it sounded, then corrected course. I responded with a simple, "Yep, we're up." He replied with a thumbs up. Around 10, we took his suggestion and stepped onto the patio for a few minutes to look at the sky. The stars were incredible, but the silence was the part that stuck with me. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind where every little sound feels like it belongs to you, because nothing else should be making noise. While we were outside, I noticed tire tracks in the dirt, looping past the side of the casita toward the back. Fresh looking. The listing had said there was only one driveway in front. I pointed them out to Lena. She shrugged and said maybe they were old. Then we both heard it, a car door closing somewhere beyond the dark stretch behind the house. We went back inside immediately and locked the door. There were no outdoor lights on the rear side, so when I looked through the back window, all I saw was my own reflection layered over the dark. Nothing moved. No headlights. No voices. At 10:27, the host texted again. "Everything okay?" Heard the door. That made both of us stop. He lived off-site. There was no reason he should have heard our patio door unless he was very close to the property. Lena called him right away and put him on speaker. He answered too fast, like the phone was already in his hand. She asked where he was. He said at home. She asked how he knew we'd gone back inside. He laughed and said he didn't. He had just been checking in because weather alerts showed gusts in the area. His voice was calm, maybe too calm. We ended the call and agreed not to answer anything else that night. We closed the blinds, turned off most of the lights, and watched TV in the bedroom with the volume low. At 11:03, another message came in. "Just make sure you latch the back shutters before bed." There were no back shutters. I checked every window to be sure. No shutters. Just fixed panes and one sliding door to the patio. I didn't reply. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. A few minutes later. Sorry, wrong property. That should have reassured me. Maybe. Instead, it made me realize he managed more than one isolated rental, and probably had routines around them. Routines involving checking whether guests were awake, whether doors were latched, whether the property was quiet enough. At some point after midnight, Lena finally fell asleep. I was still awake scrolling on my phone when I heard gravel crunch outside the bedroom wall. Slow, footsteps. Then a soft tap on the glass. Not loud enough to wake someone. Just enough to let a person know there was someone out there. I don't think I breathed for several seconds. The blinds were closed, but the slats weren't perfectly sealed. A thin line of desert moonlight cut through them, and in that line I saw a shadow interrupt the light. Someone standing very close to the window. I shook Lena awake and put a hand over her mouth before she could speak. I whispered that someone was outside. Her eyes went wide instantly. We sat there listening as the footsteps moved along the wall toward the back of the house. Then the patio door handle clicked once. Still locked. Whoever it was, tried it gently, almost politely, then let go. We called 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while we whispered details and tried not to make noise. The nearest deputy was not close. That was the first thing she told us, and I'll never forget how awful it felt hearing that with someone at the door. She asked if we could identify the person. I said no. Then my phone lit up with another text from the host. Don't be alarmed if you hear someone outside. I forgot to secure the storage on the backside earlier. The message came while we were actively listening to footsteps circling the house. No hello. No apology. Just a calm instruction not to be alarmed. Lena whispered, "He's here." I knew she was right. Either he was outside himself, or he had sent someone and knew exactly what they were doing. A minute later, there was a beam of light moving under the edge of the bedroom blind. Flashlight. It crossed slowly, stopped, then crossed back. Whoever it was looking in carefully, without making enough noise to justify panic if they got caught. We heard one more noise after that, metal scraping softly against something near the rear wall, followed by what sounded like a hatch or panel closing. Then the footsteps faded. No car starting. No engine. Just silence again. The deputy arrived almost 30 minutes later. By then, the property looked empty. He cleared the outside, took our statements, and checked the rear of the casita with a flashlight. That's where he found a low stucco storage door set into the back wall near the foundation, hidden from the patio and not visible in the listing photos. It wasn't broken, but the padlock hanging from it was unlatched. Inside that storage space were tools, extra propane, patio cushions, and something else the deputy mentioned, only after asking us to verify our host's number. There was a folding camp chair, a cooler, and a phone charger plugged into an extension cord. The space wasn't large, but it was big enough for someone to sit in for hours. The host denied being there when the deputy called him. He claimed he had remembered the unsecured storage late and texted us as a courtesy. When asked why he had previously texted to ask if we were awake, he said he was concerned about the wind. When asked how he heard our door earlier, he said it was just a figure of speech. Every answer was technically possible, which somehow made it worse. We left before sunrise and got a motel in Albuquerque. Airbnb refunded the stay after reviewing the police incident number and our messages. The listing stayed up for a while, though the reviews were eventually locked. I checked months later, and it was gone. Sometimes I still reread the screenshots, because part of me wants to find a harmless interpretation. Maybe he really was just an intrusive host. Maybe he used that back storage all the time and had terrible boundaries. Maybe the flashlight at the window was him checking the lock and not something worse. But then I think about the order of things. First, he asked if we were awake. Then he asked again in different ways. Then, only after there were footsteps at the house, he told us not to be alarmed. That sequence matters, because it means he wasn't reacting to the noise outside. He was anticipating it. And the creepiest part is the one sentence people always skip over when I tell the story. True silence, after dark. It was right there in the listing, trying to sound romantic. Now all I hear in it is a host wondering whether his guests would make enough noise for him to know they were still awake.